to see government in action. Jeez.
I'm surprised this many of you guys are here today. You all get 2 gold stars. I don't know what they add up to yet, but we'll figure something out
For him.
No, for us.
for you guys.
Okay.
We'll keep track. Every meeting you come to, you get a gold star. Anybody at the end of the year that's been to all of them gets invited to my birthday
We
party.
get free ice cream. But you weren't having any more of those.
No, yeah, that's right. Anniversary of.
Weird picture, it's nice.
It was, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it really does. Yep.
What do you call that? Just making a note to send you an email. As long as I remember to do it.
Was Lucy in town for what? Saw her here with Dan. Should I turn the recording on?
Is it?
They're wasting tape, aren't they? Silver tapes.
It's frustrating that we haven't had more problems with that laptop since that day. So,
I don't think it's frustrating. It's
well,
good.
no, the frustrating thing is that means that it was user error and I was the user.
I don't know, I think it did an automatic restart.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to set it up
Something like that,
about a half an hour beforehand, turn it on to make sure it doesn't do any of those restarts. But it has cut out for some odd reason. people on Zoom. But that's when I was having.
yeah. I think there's some issue with the sound driver or something.
We'll see. New stuff.
The putty? No, that would probably be, yeah.
Or double-sided tape,
Yeah,
double-sided duct tape. Probably.
but I want just a big honking piece of duct tape on the outside, so it looks like we got taped up there.
Someone would notice.
Oh, yeah. Is it supposed to stay warm or is it gonna cool off again?
It's gonna cool off again. We're in the low 60s tomorrow.
Is it really?
From ridiculous to the sublime.
Mhm.
I did something yesterday that I have never, ever done in my career.
Yeah.
I went into the office on Irish at noon and said, I'm out of here. It's too hot, too
It's
humid.
hot.
Yeah.
It was hot.
Can't ever remember doing that.
It was hot. I got a job site downstate in Saginaw. Oh, that was hot.
Job site.
Saginaw was hot.
All right, everybody, let's call this meeting to order.
Oh,
Welcome to the City of Harbor Springs Planning Commission regular meeting for June 16th, 2022. Jeff, would you call roll?
Yes, Al Dyke.
Here.
Barry Lustgarten.
Here.
Mark Bidet is absent. Bill Mulder.
Here.
George Pete. Here. Bob Thoma. Here. Emily Dubay.
Here.
Vanessa Warren.
Here.
And Rick Tarczynski.
Here.
All right. And I'd like to introduce everybody to John Icoangeli. He's our new planning consultant. He'll be working with us.
Hi, John.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
So,
Welcome, John.
Thank you, board.
Yep, John firm is Beckett Rader, a world-renowned planning firm, and lucky to have an office here in Petoskey. And we'll look forward to working with you and getting the benefit of your experience. Thanks, John. All right, let's talk about the minutes. We have two sets of minutes, and has anybody identified any corrections or adjustments or additions to those minutes? All right, let's go one at a time. Who's going to care to?
I move to approve May 19th minutes.
Second, there's a second. All in favor of approving the May 19th minutes? Say
Aye.
Aye. Great. Let's talk about the June 7th special meeting minutes.
No problems with those either.
I move to approve the June 7th special meetings minutes.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Great. All right, now is the time for public comment and correspondence. Anyone from the public care to make a comment on something which is not on today's agenda? Victor, you're looking at Zoom, right? No,
We do have someone under RG, but
okay, no comments there?
we did get one letter from Bill Mulder, which I did try and email to everybody, and I apologize that my email was having a flub. I put that out on everybody's desk there. Bill, if you'd like to provide some explanation
I'd
on
love
that.
to. Yes, there's a letter on the table, and I wanted to tell you about an endeavor that I'm exploring. It's a nonprofit, and it has to do with housing for our community. And we're looking with a group that's looking at forming what's called a community land trust, which is a extension of a land conservancy concept, but it's focused on homes instead of just vacant land. And it's an approach that's been used in Martha's Vineyard, and Aspen, and Lake Tahoe, and Jackson, Wyoming, and a bunch of really expensive resort communities. The concept is that people could pool some money, so there would be donors, this is all philanthropy, and potentially buy a home or two or three in the area, fix it up, turn around and sell it again to a buyer. And the land is held by the land trust, and the buyer of the home just leases that land on a long-term basis. A 99-year land lease is just actually like Bayview, Association Bayview, where the owner owns the structure. And the idea is that with that land lease, then the buyer becomes, or has to live in it 10 or 11 months a year. So it's reserved for a full-time person. It helps a family make the jump from renting to owning a home. And because this group could offer a discount on the house, and they take the land out of the equation for the purchase price. So it could help people get started in home ownership. And it may or may not get off the ground, since we don't know if donors will be interested in setting up something like this, but it's a proven method and I'm interested in exploring it. And a resident had suggested that that could potentially cause a conflict down the road. And yet I don't see it. And I talked to Jim Raymer, he didn't see it. And the area that this group's focused on is the whole 6 townships plus the city of Harbor Springs. And so city of Harbor Springs is, 1.25 square miles in this area is 140 square miles. So, if this thing gets off the ground and if donors participated and if some houses were bought, there's a possibility one might be in the city or something. And so if that's the case, there's no zoning required, no approvals, no anything from anybody. So it should be smooth sailing. But if there were something related to zoning, of course, I would recuse myself like our standard process. So, anybody see any concerns with this?
Oh, no.
I think it's kind of like if you donate to the Humane Society and there was some, and I like pets, you know, so if there was a regulation related to pets, there wouldn't be no conflict there, right? And so,
You're okay with it?
okay,
Don't
I
worry
think-
about it, have
all
fun.
right, great. All right, good deal. Well, thanks.
Thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Pleasure
George.
calling you about
I did have a question. I kind of lost track of and was wondering what the status is of the summer development or the site plan that we reviewed 2 months ago between, I guess, West Bluff and Lake Street.
So the zoning code or I think, I'm not sure if it's the zoning code or the city code requires that a project like that comes to the planning commission twice. They come for their initial review where we provide them with direction on what we'd like to see be part of the plan. We had that review, we gave them our tentative approval to move forward. The ball is back in their court. They need to prepare the rest of the documents to kind of finalize what that will all look like. That would mean that they're preparing their full kind of surveyed site plan and for the condominium documents, the master deed, potentially the bylaws, any of those other documents that would need to be prepared that would be recorded at the Register of Deeds office to finalize that project, taking into consideration the guidance that we presented to them at our previous meeting. My understanding is that they're working on that process. I don't know how long it will take them before they come back to us. But we'll see. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments, questions from the commissioners? All right. Well, then let's move into our new and old business. The first thing on the agenda is the site plan review for 294 East 3rd Street. And Jeff, would you like to give us an update on where we stand on that?
Yep. So we previously talked about this last month. We gave some direction to Michelle that we would like her to go back and added some more information further defining how those uses will be made separate or kept separate through their proposed plan. We also have a follow-up review to that from John Aguangeli, recognizing some of those changes and providing some further thoughts on that. So we'd like to, Michelle, if you'd like to introduce and kind of talk your way through what you've identified there.
Sure, and I did read the review earlier today. You know, I've got questions, but that's not really appropriate right now. Certainly most of, I think everyone was here last time, so you heard a lot from me last month. All the same is true. I would like to introduce the owner. He is here this evening. This is Brian.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome.
Some of you guys.
He was out of town last month. So yes, we are still trying to pursue, you know, obviously developing this space with the plans as proposed. Brian is the owner and would be proprietor of the business that would be on the main level of this space. We did provide, you know, a plan that would perhaps separate the spaces for a future owner, should that be required. You know, this, you know, obviously we're here to answer any questions that you still may have, and depending on what our path is forward today. I don't know, you know, what that might be. You know, what is the path forward if this is a use that is not in the zoning code, you know, according to John. But does the planning commission have the right to approve a plan that meets the spirit of the code and the spirit of the master plan? But certainly we're here to answer questions and.
As I recall, there were two things you were going to look at, Michelle. One was conceptual walling off of the entrance to the two separate facilities if that was needed in the future sometime. The second thing was an agreement that the special land use would be withdrawn if the building was sold in the future. And do I understand it right from your response that you declined to make that?
Well, Mr. Nix asked that we consider putting a deed restriction on the condominium, saying that there would never be residential use on the main level. We just didn't feel it was necessary to put another restriction on the deed, since the law is already outlined that you cannot have residential use on the main level in the CBD.
Okay. Great. John, would you like to tell us what you saw in the application?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. What I saw in the application was that Mr. Nix had just commented that he thought that maybe this could be construed as a home occupation. And based on your ordinance, a home occupation is primarily relegated to a residential property. Looking at your zoning ordinance, your ordinance already allows commercial on the first floor and offices on the first floor, and it allows in the downtown area, residential on the second and third. The issue here is separation of the uses. I did not find anything in the ordinance that requires uses to be separated. On the other hand, I construe what the applicant is proposing as a traditional live-work unit, which is in many communities allowed in the downtown area as a transition between the downtown and a residential. Okay, so on 3rd Street, you've got that condition. You have, actually on 3rd Street, you have some former houses that were converted into businesses, and then you also have some residents. So my issue is not that, in my opinion, this is not a home occupation. This is a traditional live-work unit where the first floor, in this case, is professional offices, and the second floor is residential. I provided in my staff analysis a couple of photographs that depict what a live-work unit is. And there's actually the third type, which is called a work-live unit, where the building is primarily dedicated for workspace, and it may have a small component where somebody like a caretaker or a manager may live in the facility. So you have 3 types. You have home occupation, which is an office or a commercial use in a primary residential building. Live work, which usually is split 50-50, and then a work live, which is split the other way 80-20. My suggestion is that, well, first, you can't withdraw a special land use. Special land use runs with the property, so you can't extinguish it if somebody decides to move out. The issue here would be a development agreement that could be prepared by the city attorney, signed by the property owner, that in such time as the property owner either decided to lease out the apartment or the second floor, or stay on the second floor and lease out the first floor, the development agreement would kick in, saying that at that point, they have to put a separation between the uses because there's going to be different occupants. And that's my take on it. I think that when you revise the zoning ordinance, you may want to consider actually putting in a definition for live work and putting in some requirements. And the requirements in the ordinance would be the same ones that I would put in the development agreement. If the property or the building is demised by occupancy, then it would trigger a separation, a wall, and also meeting the appropriate fire building codes. But what they're proposing, from my point of view, based on your current ordinance, should be allowed as a special land use. It's an appropriate use for the building. And like I said, the ordinance doesn't really have any requirements about separation of uses. Okay. So that's kind of my observation of it.
Thank you.
The only thing I'd like to add to that, I think the concern is not necessarily in the future if there were different people occupying the first floor versus the second floor. More, I think the concern is if one person is occupying both spaces, that there would be a spillover of residential use onto the first floor. I think the current owner seems to be very aware, Michelle has pointed out that that's not the intent. But if this property was sold to a new property owner, they might not be informed of that requirement that the first floor be solely used for commercial and have some, potential intent to have some spillover of residential use onto that first floor. And I think that's my concern is the possibility of that potential and how do we make sure that we avoid that happening?
Mr. Nix had I was informed that Mr. Nix said something about a deed restriction. I think a development agreement that is executed between the applicant or the property owner and the city, and I'd let the attorney weigh in, but it's not uncommon that the development agreement is registered at the Register of Deeds and then would be disclosed at the time the property is sold. That would potential trigger about preventing residential onto the first level.
But if somebody were to, the second person to purchase it, could they still keep it as is?
As a lived work, yes.
Okay.
Would it not be more of an enforcement issue or a zoning issue?
Well, what the enforcement issue would be is you can't condition, you can't have an agreement saying that if they sell, you're going to withdraw the special land use.
Okay.
But you can have a development agreement that if they don't comply with the development agreement, then the planning commission has the right to revoke the special land use and go through the enforcement procedure to withdraw that. But, that's a public hearing process and, but that can happen. But, rarely do I ever see that. Usually with a project like this with a well-executed development agreement, which is registered at the Register of Deeds, becomes part of the title search. Usually that clears up a lot of the problems. But I would advise long-term with the zoning code, because what's happened with COVID is that there are more people working remotely now.
Sure.
And this is becoming more common where people are buying a commercial structure, having their office on the first floor and living on the second or the third. The issue here is the separation, but your ordinance doesn't require, at least at this point, the ordinance is silent on the separation of uses.
Jeff, when you say residential use may overflow under residential use, what exactly are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
Let's say 5 years from now, the next owner decides that they need more room and so they want to move their kitchen downstairs or they want to add a bedroom downstairs or a bedroom and bathroom or something. And you just have that expansion of that upstairs living use transitioning and becoming a part of the first floor. And some of those things, and now we do have a requirement in the central business district with commercial properties that if they're modifying their site and their floor plan, they should come back to the planning commission for a site plan review. But there is the potential that an applicant doesn't realize that that's a requirement and just goes straight to the building department and pulls building permits and starts modifying their use. And we've had that happen in some locations downtown before. When we look at sites along Main Street on the south side, there's a building or two in the area near Yummy's, I think it is, where at some point in the late 80s, early 90s, the back portion of the first floor was turned into part of the upstairs living. And we never knew about it. And then 10 years later or 15 years later, it becomes listed for sale. And in the listing, they say with living on the first floor and the back half, or on the second floor and the back half of the first floor. We then get into a discussion with the realtor saying, first floor is commercial use, but then they provide us documentation because our code right now states that if you can document that you have been, had a certain use going on since prior to 1990, it becomes an existing nonconformity and you're able to continue to do that. And so then they were able to document that in, I think it was like 1985 or 86, the back portion of that building, they pulled building permits and turned it into more living space. So it has happened before in Harbor Springs. And I'm not trying to say that anybody would purposefully do something, but I think sometimes things happen where the new owner of a building just isn't aware of that requirement or restriction, that can't be done. So it's just making sure that, you know, that we have something in place to address that, to prevent that from happening. You know, and I think that through discussion, we've talked about that what they've proposed in their current plan meets zoning, right? They have commercial use on the first floor, residential on the second. It's just making sure that we have something in place to prevent that from that overflow from happening and coming downstairs.
Doesn't our zoning forbid residential on the first floor already?
Correct,
So
yes.
then what extra benefit would a development agreement add?
A development agreement just trips the trigger when there is a sale. It's doing what Jeff is saying. The community or the city then is aware that there's a sale, so they can appropriately notify the potential purchaser about the requirements.
I think it also puts something on the record that a realtor would have to then say to the new owner, you know, because we have such an openness between the residential upstairs and commercial downstairs, that there is this agreement on file that you need to be aware of before you sign these papers buying the property.
I would do it two ways. Just to make the record as strong as possible. If the planning commission wants to grant the special land use, then you would articulate that condition that in the future, residential shall not be allowed on the first floor. And then to follow that up, we'd have a development agreement that would get filed at the county register of deeds. So it would be in the public record, both areas, here at the city and then at the register of deeds when the property would sell.
Bill, you had a question?
The work, live, work by the state says it's operated by the tenant and it specifies persons living on second or third floors. To me, I've been in the building and looking at the plans. Isn't this more of a loft and not a second floor? And does that bear on anything?
No, not, I mean, I picked it up as almost like a loft concept, but some live work units have internal connections between the first and second floor with an internal stairway. Some other live work units have a primary entrance for the first floor, and then the secondary entrances to the upper levels. That's the separation issue, but your ordinance is silent on that. And I said, when you review the ordinance in the future, we do live work units, the planning commission can make a determination if they will allow internal connectivity or external with a separate entrance at that point.
Thank you.
And having the upstairs open where you're physically able to see it from the downstairs, that would be okay?
Yeah, that's one of the formats of the live work unit. That's why I provided you in a couple of pictures to show you how some of them are actually set up. It's a great concept for downtown because you're occupying the first floor for non-residential and you're encouraging residential development on the upper floors, which you want downtown, so you have people that are living downtown. I think the other stipulation that you could put in if you grant it as a condition was that the upper level has to be occupied by the occupant. So you don't end up with the loft part of the property being used as like a short-term rental or, you know, you refer to it as a guest house?
Well, when it's in an accessory.
When it's an accessory, okay. So, yeah.
George, did you have something?
Yeah, so if we were to move forward with this, would we have to grant a special land use, or is this just permitted under the zoning code? Reading the analysis and stuff, I'm maybe a little behind or a little confused as to what we would need to do to allow this to
Mr.
happen.
Chairman, if I may, to Mr. Pete's question, my interpretation is that your zoning ordinance for the CBD allows non-residential on the first floor and residential on the second. So my opinion is actually it's a permitted use. It's not a special land use. But that's the reason for the development agreement, is to articulate some of those conditions.
articulate conditions for the special land use that doesn't,
No, if you consider it as a permitted use,
okay,
then you'd want to have a development agreement that would include conditions that you would normally put into a special land use.
Do you think that this is something that we should add as a special land use in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
all right, should we take
I
a
think
pause?
you're
for a
on
minute?
slippery ground.
I think you,
Half the businesses in the United States have kitchens on their first floors.
Sure.
With dishwashers, stoves, ovens.
you're correct. We have one at our office.
Exactly. There's one on the other side of that door.
Maybe not beds, though.
No, but the kitchen issue
Well,
is,
I think, when you look at businesses, I think a lot of them will have, bathrooms as well, But, at some point, there needs to be some idea of when you've transitioned, where now that's.
I understand.
If they remove the kitchen upstairs and they add a kitchen downstairs,
That's pretty obvious.
that's pretty obvious that they have moved some of their living to the first floor.
Or if it's just the employees that are using the kitchen and the bottom floor and not the people that are living on the top floor.
Should we take a pause for a minute and see if there are any public comments on this issue? All in favor of getting some public comment at this point, please say aye.
Aye.
Public?
I have one question, and it's more about administration. So when property changes hands in the city of Carver Springs, is the city notified that there's a new property owner in town?
Yeah, so, you're required, well, you're not really required to, but most people will record their deed at the Register of Deeds office. Emmett County processes that, and we do get copies of those, or we work with the equalization department to be notified and keep track of the new owners.
So in my business, I often have to debunk what a realtor has told an owner, right? So somebody's already purchased a property or so it's sort of my job to say, sorry, they probably thought you could do this thing, but you can't actually do this thing. Let's figure out what you can actually do. So I suspect that when a new owner in town buys a building downtown in the CBD, they could potentially, the city could reach out and say, hi, welcome to the city of Carver Springs. You may not be aware, but you just purchased a building in the CBD. These are the allowed uses. If you want to change your use or modify your building, you have to get a zoning permit. And I do think that probably in the last 10 or 15 years, Emmett County has been very stringent about building permits. They don't give anyone a building permit unless they have a zoning permit first. I mean, you can't, I don't know if anybody knows Tammy, but Tammy or Marty for that matter, but you really can't, as far as I've ever seen, I've never seen anybody get a building permit without a zoning permit first. So not to say people might not do things and start hammering through their floors, downtown, but those are just a couple of, I feel like the rules and laws are kind of in place in a way, and I totally understand if you feel like you need that extra blanket of security for the development of the building. But I do think that the laws are there. I don't know, that was just more curiosity than anything on my part.
Well, part of the difficulty with relying on getting notification of the new owner is sometimes that doesn't happen for 3 or 4 months. I just received a month ago a deed that was recorded, in May, but the sale took place December 30th. So sometimes there's quite a delay between when the title agency actually files those documents and does that recording. Also, if the building department is great when there's anything new being added to a property that wasn't there before. But when it's a remodel of something existing, they don't require a zoning permit. And because we don't really, in most cases, require that a zoning permit be pulled for something that's a remodel. And that's why with I guess another example of a project that I think kind of has some similarity here is when we talk about guest quarters or accessory dwelling units. When we have somebody that proposes to build a 2-story garage, even if their intent is that we're just going to have storage upstairs, we have in our zoning code that if that space could be made habitable, if it's more than half a story, that we require them to get special land use approval for guest quarters, even if their intent is storage, because all they need is a permit to remodel that upper area and turn it into living space. And we would not have that notification that that space has been converted. And I think in some ways, this is kind of similar to that, it's very difficult if the onus is on us to reach out to somebody to get notification, because we don't always necessarily know that we need to do that. And putting that responsibility on the property owner that they need to contact us, I think is important.
Why don't we,
Bill, there might be some more comments. Is there any more comments from?
I'll just, maybe some background. I've known that building since 1968. When I first came up here, it's one of my favorite buildings in town. You know, when Fred and Roma owned it, and I watched it go from an old Packard car dealership with a turntable in it to a boat storage to an antique storage to a cool house gallery, and it never, even on the Main Street side, had a lot of traffic in the last 50 years. My intent, the reason I bought it was because I want to preserve it. I don't want to develop it. I'm not trying to monetize that investment. It makes no sense. I could build something for a lot cheaper than what it's going to cost to do the project. I want to beautify it. I want to keep it in town the way it is. I want to make sure it's preserved, which it won't be. The windows are gone, the bricks are, really deteriorating, and the roof leaks. So I'm trying to preserve a 100-year-old car dealership. I've been in the car business my entire life, adult life. And I don't know what the use is going to be because I want it to be an appropriate one. I'm not retired yet. So I want to think about that. But I want to live and work downtown. You'll get a resident tax and you'll get a business. And I would be open to ideas. I've asked everyone in the city, what do you think we need? I'd like to look at a variety of things that would be.
Place where I could buy a pair of socks.
We don't need art galleries. I don't need another ice cream store. I would love to have something that really is cool for the city. I thought about a venue space that could be educational, where kids can see a movie and we have a space to maybe review the movie behind the lyric. I work at Ford. I know the curator at the Henry Ford Museum, and thought about maybe having something like a satellite. We've got a lot of stuff in archives, artifacts that are relevant to Emmett County. So there's a few ideas I'd like to do. Point being, I can't chop that space up. It's built to be an open space. I don't want to have a little cozy art gallery or donut shop. I want it to be something that looks open. If I have to wall that front off for a separate entrance above, it changes the whole feel of that space and the beauty of it. It's an industrial building, it needs to look industrial. And of course, I intend to live upstairs. I'm saying that's more than enough space for me, but I understand future use. But it might be an office, it might be something that, I've talked to 3 different businesses locally about investing and moving an office, and so I'm just not sure what it's going to be until I finish it. And I retire and figure out what I'm going to do.
well, thank you very much. Enjoy hearing from you. Are there any other public comments on this issue? Nobody on the phone? All right, how about a motion to close the public input part on this?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. Maybe we can attack this thing this way. Commissioners, how do you feel about the premise that this actually is already an approved use and doesn't require a special land use.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
Works for me.
I used to own the building.
Rick,
So
what do
that's
you-
how it got where
Rick,
it
what
is.
do you see?
I think it's already there, so I don't think it needs a special use. Although I'd like the idea of a special use with the deed restrictions to look towards the future.
You need deed restrictions or development agreement?
Development agreement or deed restriction?
Deed restriction.
I would lean towards the development.
I would too.
Yeah, I think development agreement as well.
Yeah.
And I think we just need to protect the downtown,
Right.
as far as,
And help
You know,
the, help
eventually
the
all retail
city
can go
out
away,
for
sure.
future
There's
ownership.
essentially a deed restriction now.
The law's already
Right,
there.
exactly.
We're just looking to maybe help it out if it were to be sold.
I mean, that's what we're trying to,
and I think
Get
going
through
forward,
here is a
we do
deed
need to
restriction.
address it and redraw it out
Right.
to really define what it is, because I think we're kind of opening ourselves up for losing a lot of that retail space going forward, that, you know, all of it could go to this concept, which it is a great concept, but you know, a certain percentage of what we have would be nice, so.
As the owner of the property, what is your thoughts on the idea of a development agreement and what we've talked about here?
Let's make sure we know what the two aspects would be in a development agreement. Right? The ones I took down would be that there would be no residential use on the first floor for a future owner.
correct.
Correct.
And that there would have to be the same owner for both the first and the second floor.
Correct.
Was there another aspect we were trying to capture? All right. Ms. Architect, Mr. Owner, how would you feel
I have a
about?
question. So with that, we're preventing anybody from ever coming in and purchasing or leasing the downstairs for some kind of a business while somebody else lives upstairs.
That's right.
Why do we care?
Let me see if I can phrase that, see if I can answer the question, if I understand it right. We care because this is a live-work arrangement, and by definition, that has to be the same owner, the same user. If not, it would have been it would have to be separate space. It would have to be-
Yes, it would have to be enclosed. Okay.
I think my thought on that is because it's so open between the two areas, that if you had a different person living upstairs, like, you know, a renter upstairs or a renter downstairs, and you had separate uses by separate people, that openness between them might lead to creating
Well, I
conflict.
understand. So then you need to go in that direction. What we're suggesting right now is that the same person that owns the downstairs has to own the upstairs.
Has to occupy.
I think it would be the user, right?
Yeah.
That the user doesn't transition and use the first floor for residential purposes. And that the user is both using the upstairs and the downstairs. That we're not separating the uses.
But if they were separate
If they were separate, then
Then
you
he could
could
do
have
what he
two
wants.
different parties, yes.
at that point.
Correct.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
Thank you for raising that. That's my problem with trying to encumber me with any arrangement, is that I've explained my use, it is within code. And when I sell it, that future buyer may not want to live like Highland. May not want to have a live work, and he will have to meet code. He will have to rent the bottom space out. You will either have to reconfigure the upspace, separate it totally. Or not use it at all, rent the whole space out commercial. And let them use the upstairs for storage. Or retail. I don't really care to have a side agreement of any sort encumbering a future owner of it. I'm gonna comply with code. And I'm sure the future owner is gonna have to. And I believe your master plan is gonna have even better codes, clearer codes on these issues. And I don't really see the point in trying to get, I lost track of the terms, it was deed restriction, special use case. and what's the way-
Development agreement.
Development agreement. Yeah, and I don't think any other downtown business owners, property owners have had to sign these types of things. And in a village like this, it's a village, it's less than 3,000 people, and we get a burst in the summer. I would think would want live, work, or the ability to have that space where some young business person could maybe have a store and a loft and live there. At least it allows that now. And if it changes, we've got zoning laws that protect it. Yeah, that's my take on it. There's plenty of worse, more flagrant things that have happened in this town than what I'd like to do. You know the one, I know that, building. I almost bought that building, looked at it. Yeah, that's not the plan to make that a residence downstairs. I definitely want to have something that I do when I retire.
John, how can we make this as easy as possible?
Well, I think the approach would be that is making it easy as possible. It's a permitted use. You can have an office or a retail on the first floor. You can have residential on the second. The issue here is the lack of separation between the uses. And if you look at it as a live-work unit, that means the person that's occupying, the same person occupies both spaces, the downstairs and the upstairs. And that's how it's currently designed by the architect. The question is in the future, if somebody buys the building and they want to lease the first floor out for retail, and they want to lease the second floor to another occupant for residential, at that point, it would trigger a separation of walls because you have two different occupants in the building. That's really the only.
That's it?
That's it.
Done deal.
That's what the development agreement would say. If the applicant sold the building under the pretext that it's a live-work unit, and a new person bought it with the idea they're putting their office or their store downstairs and they're going to live in the loft, that would still be a live-work unit, and it wouldn't require the separation. That's the issues. When you cut the building up into different occupancies or different tenants, you need to have the separation. And that's all the development agreement would do. I mean, that's the conditions that the chairman listed.
But yet we have the laws that are supposed to take care of that. So, are we saying that?
With the development.
Why do we
you
need
need a
to,
development
why do,
agreement?
and I think that's
Well,
what
I
he's saying too.
Well, here's the situation that I'm trying to avoid. Let's say that someone purchases the property from the current owner. And after purchasing, they pull their permits and they start changing the construction, adding living space on the first floor. We find out about that, we contact them, they're $30,000, $50,000 into their project. And I tell them, you violated zoning, you can't have residential on the first floor. I want to avoid the situation where he says, no one told me I couldn't do this. But if there's a development agreement in place that says that while it continues to be a live-work unit, that residential must be kept to the second floor, then the development agreement could state that if somebody wants to change that, if they want to separate and have an upstairs separate user and a downstairs separate user, that there be separations put in place so that it's no longer a live-work unit.
So unfortunately, we have laws in place, but they're not being followed, and bad situations are occurring.
Well, ultimately, the responsibility falls on the property owner to be aware of what the restrictions are. Not all property owners are aware of that, or some property owners are unfortunately misled by the realtor that they use. Not that, I think that most of our realtors in town are good, but occasionally there are situations. When we dealt with a similar situation, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, where a property owner up on Lake Street was told that they had an apartment in their garage that they could rent out. And afterwards, when I contacted the property owner that purchased it and told them that they can't do that it wasn't even approved to have that use, they were told, well, my realtor told me that I could do this. And unfortunately, in that situation, the realtor misled them, and we spent several months working out, and we've actually made changes to that whole district. That's the one district where if you go through a special land use process, you can rent out your guest quarters. And it stemmed from them purchasing a piece of property where they were misled on what they could do. And I'm just looking to, for a way that we can try and make sure that that doesn't happen downtown, where we have a lot of interest from people to be able to have living space on the first floor. And I know that this person has not said that that's his intent, but it may not be the intent of a future owner.
Okay, let me tell you where I am. I think this is a great use. It's a great project. There's nothing but upside for the community. We're gonna get a great historic building preserved. We're gonna get, the lights will be on, we're gonna get a new resident, and it's all good. Is there something short of a development agreement that would be involved with, or that could serve the purpose of notifying the next potential buyer?
It's either a deed restriction or some type of notice, like a development agreement that is recorded at the Register of Deeds. I mean, and the reason for doing that is public notification. I mean, when they research, when somebody's gonna buy the property, they're gonna do a title search, and the title search is gonna say, oh, by the way, there is a development agreement that has these stipulations in it. It's just a matter of public record.
All right.
I'm clear on understanding how this is a redundancy, but it's a redundancy that could help the city and help a future landowner.
Correct.
So it's a redundancy, but I think it's a helpful redundancy. What I'm not clear is how it may harm the owner to do this, because if it's just restating the law, I don't see why, personally, is it just an extra step because it's unfair other people haven't done that downtown, or is it?
I don't think you're gonna make residences sign a development agreement, because someone might put an apartment in the garage. I don't think you're gonna make any downtown business.
But for you in particular,
Well, that's what I mean. I feel like they're singling out me.
Okay, so that's
So
what.
that's where I have a problem. I feel like more than most people, I'm a huge Harbor Springs preservationist. I love this town, and I'm not trying to flip it or do anything VRBO it. It's gonna be my live work. You've got great zoning laws or codes that already protect for everything that you're afraid of. But you're asking me to put a burden on my next sale, or if I ever, whoever owns it next, don't have any intentions to sell it, just because of your fear that you can't enforce your own zoning code. And that to me is an unfairness. It's something that you're not asking others to do or didn't until this instance. And that's my only beef with it.
Mr. Chair, if I can address the applicant. The issue here is that the ordinance is unfortunately silent on the issue of separation of uses. And it says that a retail or a non-residential use, a retail or office can be on the first floor, residence can be on the second. There is not a definition in the ordinance for live work. And if there were provisions in the ordinance for live work, the ordinance would say that you could have internal occupancy or internal access to the second floor without separation. But it would also say in the event that the same occupant did not occupy both spaces, then there would be a provision in the ordinance that would say that there would be a requirement for separation. What I kind of laid out here was, since we don't have that provision in the ordinance, we have two alternatives. One is go with what the plan is with a development agreement that would have the stipulation that would normally be in the zoning ordinance, or table the request, have the planning commission actually amend the zoning code to have the live work provisions in it. So this was the easier track to go with. The other track would probably be protracted and would take another 3 months to go through the revisions, the public hearing, and the adoption process.
So we're not singling it out.
We're not singling
You're
you
just
out. We're just-
breaking ground.
Yeah, we're just trying to provide a reasonable way to get what you need and to preserve the building, but at the same time, protect the public interest.
Yeah, I think if we do a development agreement, I'm gonna, whatever you guys grant is what we're gonna march with, so. If it's not too much of a encumbrance, or it doesn't look like a tough second use if someone does buy it. Oddly, whoever buys that, I don't really think they could sell. They're either gonna use it all as one business, or they're gonna rent it and not have anyone upstairs. But I don't really think there's much risk in that. There aren't a lot of people like me that wanna do that. So I mean, I'm okay with it. Frankly, I don't intend on selling it.
Okay.
I think it's a weird way to get to, the end result, which is enforcing your own zoning laws.
It is curious. I get it. We get it.
I think it's redundant. I think it's like saying that there's a speed limit of 25 miles or 30 miles an hour on Main Street, and then saying, if you're in a car, if you're driving, if the sun is out.
Yeah, but we don't have a solid ordinance on the left, or we don't have it
We do.
spelled out. No, we don't.
I think the
And he's
the
recommending
openness
that
between
we
the
do.
areas conflicts the situation here.
That's the issue, is there's not the provision for separation.
And usually we've approached our zoning code that if it's not in there, we treat it as it's not
Yeah.
allowed. So this is a way to get around that as well.
The way I would phrase it, there's enough in the ordinance that would say that's a permitted use, looking at just the requirements that are in the ordinance. But because the ordinance does not discuss separation between uses, we need to have something implemented. We have to have something that's executed that protects the future sale or conversion of the property, and that's the development agreement. At some point in time, when you rewrite the zoning ordinance and you have live work provisions in it, that development agreement won't be needed. It's kind of a transition between today and the time that you amend the ordinance. That's all. That's how I would look at it.
Could the development agreement have a sunset aspect to it that says if the city zoning code is amended to?
Yes, we could put it in there.
And Mr. Owner, would you consider that?
Yeah.
And then when that happens, then that just goes away.
Yes.
I like that.
Thank you.
And John, am I correct in saying that what we could do is, if the planning commission wanted to, that they could approve the site plan contingent upon staff review and development with the property owner of the development agreement?
Yes.
All right, that sounds like a way forward.
With a sunset period, yeah. I think that's good.
All right, so we have a motion on the table by Al to offer approval of this site plan. And go ahead to the owner. And the owner, city staff will put together a development agreement. It'll have a sunset provision in it. And the owner will consider that. And if staff says okay, then we give our approval.
I second.
We have a motion on the table and it's been seconded to approve this site plan with the conditions that we discussed. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say nay. All right.
Mr. Chair, just one other question. Is the building on the National Register of Historic Places?
Should be, but no.
Because if it was, you could avail yourself of the 20% federal income tax credit and the 5% state investment credit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My brother put the Good Heart Church on in the Douglas home. I'll see if I can get him on this one.
Yeah, it would be with the combination of the federal and state, that's 25% rebate on your renovation costs.
Wow, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I've got a Virgil Haynes photo of it. And I'd love to find that.
I don't, I'm sorry.
Someone has it.
Brian, I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name.
Gopigian.
Oh, just like it sounds?
Yeah.
We'll certainly, Michelle, I have your contact information. We'll get together and figure out whatever we need to do to work with you to come up with a development agreement that works.
Is this something that the city attorney would be tracking?
Yeah, well,
We can,
John and Jeff will share.
Yeah, we'll work with the attorney on it.
we'll send something to him, have him start something, and then you guys can review it and provide your feedback.
Should be simple, should be.
Very simple.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too difficult.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right,
Thank you.
congrats on your new building. We can't wait to see it.
Thanks for buying it.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing
Yeah, we're
it.
excited.
Sure, you'll have to come over. It'll be something really cool for town. I know.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda is short-term rentals. And my intention here was just to loop back and get an update from Jeff and Sue Winter, our short-term rental aficionado resident, who has been doing her tracking, and just talk about the numbers and the maps that came from Pomari. And then what I'd really like to do is get your input about how we attack this thing this summer, what the right approach would be. And I got a couple different alternatives on that regarding a public meeting or some type of a meeting. All right, are you up for that? Does that sound good? All right, thank you. All right, Jeff.
Let me start off with some numbers.
Great.
So currently, right now, we have 73 short-term rental licenses that are in effect for, and this is, as a reminder, it's a yearly renewal. So we have 73 people that have applied for and been approved for short-term rental use for this year. There are 5 that I have yet to process. So we're up to about 78. Of those 73, 16 of them are new applications this year where they were previously not short-term rentals before. So it's about 22% of the properties that have short-term rental licenses this year that are new ones. One thing that I did not grab was the number of properties that were short-term rentals last year that are not this year.
Okay.
So there are, I think, a few of those. We also have about another 9 properties that in review have listings on that I've been able to verify through our Harmari, the organization, that have not been licensed yet and that we're working to get licensed. And then Sue Winter has provided us with a list that I've gone through. There's 8 on that list that are then not accounted for. And Sue, I don't know if you have the ability, I'll give you an email that has these of these 8. And if you can provide me, you've indicated that they're advertising as short-term rental. I have been unable to find any documentation of that or proof of that. If you can maybe
Send the link.
provide me a link to their
Yeah,
listing or something so that I
I
can
can
verify. Yeah, then I'll be able to pursue, getting them licensed or whatever needs to be done with that. But that pretty much covers what we had. And then Sue had provided us with a list. There's a few that were duplicates that we already had in our system, Sue. And then I had one, an address that I was not able to verify as an address in Harbor Springs, so I couldn't follow anything up on that. But then the rest of them were covered through that, that we either had them through Harmari and then we were working with them with letters or whatnot. So between everything, between the ones that we have licensed, the ones that we're working on getting licensed, the ones that we need to look into, we potentially have up to about 95 properties that are short-term rental properties within the city of Harbor Springs. And there may be 1 or 2 more, there may be 1 or 2 less. We do run into situations where somebody still has a listing up. I actually, one of the people on this list, they have their listing online, but they've blocked out all the dates because they're living in the home this year. They don't want to remove the active listing from the website because then they would lose all of the history. So that they may choose to put it back on and have it be available for rent next year. If they remove the listing completely so that it doesn't show up on the website, they lose their history of the reviews and the previous tenants that have been there and things like that, and they don't want to lose that. But they did provide me with some documentation that, and I reviewed that with Victor. We felt that it was sufficient to demonstrate that no one else was going to be using the property that year and that it would be owner occupied whenever it was occupied. But sometimes situations like that, they come through. I provided you with a report from Harmari that says that we have 301 active listings within Harbor Springs. That of course, it's difficult to really tie that number in to what's happening within Harbor Springs just from that. One of the situations is if you have your property listed through Airbnb and VRBO and Graham Management and anybody else, you have 4 listings that shows up 4 times on the list. So there's some difficulty in there, but it does, I think, give us an idea in some other ways. Victor has the map showing kind of the hot spots of approximately where they're located. Bill Mulder had tied that in and done some calculations percentage wise that we've talked about before of how many are within the central business district and other business districts versus in single family residential areas. But I think that covers the information that we talked about that you wanted me to provide, Bill.
Thanks for sending this.
If there's anything else that comes up you would like me to look into, I'll do so.
Have we looked into seeing if they're able to turn off their Airbnb or VRBO where it just doesn't show up? But they're still able, their account's still active with them?
What I was able to do when I go to that property and the way that this individual is, when we talked about it, is I can go on and I can see the listing, but when I try and book a date, it's completely booked for the whole year. He provided me with some documentation. I only have limited access to the portions of Airbnb, that I can actually look at and view and that Harmari has access to. He was able to provide me information from the portion of the website that he can get to as the owner of that listing.
Yep.
That shows that he is the one that has blocked it off so that it can't be used. Because otherwise I go in there and I just see that it's booked.
Yeah.
Right. So it's somewhat difficult for me, but he went the extra mile, provided me that extra information to show that he's the one that booked it, that it can't be used.
Would that be helpful if I did research to see if it's something that they can just turn off with a switch?
Yeah, if there's more information so that it doesn't show up at all, if you have some.
See where we can get good data.
Yeah, if somebody has a short-term listing that they have that they can check the settings or something, if that's, then we could maybe instruct the property owner specifically do this, but.
And I'll make a note, an observation. So last year we probably had, was it about 66, 67 registered? 68. So yeah, registered. And that was I'm already approximating that was 80 to 85% of what was likely out there. So we likely had probably between 80 and 85. So right now we have 73 registered and likely up to 95. So probably between 90 and 95. So we're talking about, if we're doing the math, we're probably talking an increase of probably 10 to 15 homes, which is an increase of more like 15% now in the last year. Yeah.
So of these new licenses, is it individuals who applied for these? Are there any investment groups buying these homes? What do we know about the new licenses that were issued for 2022, these 16 that you mentioned?
Sometimes that's difficult to tell because so many property owners in the Harbor Springs area purchase their property through an LLC. I think that even if it's somebody that lives there year round, they're doing that for whatever protection that affords them. A lot of property owners have been purchasing the property and putting it into an LLC of the address of that property, for instance.
Do we know, are there any other communities that require a full ownership disclosure when applying for licenses like these?
So we do. We request the property owner. We have a spot on our application for the applicant, the owner, and our local agent. And we have been requesting that the property owners put their actual, the name of the person as opposed to the LLC. I don't think that we've had a lot of like investment companies coming in and doing it en masse. We have some companies that are organizing this. Graham Management in town is, operating as the local agent for a lot of property owners. I haven't really noticed that we've had, a multitude of multiple, of these properties that are being turned into short-term rentals that are all coming through by one group. I think that it's been a growing trend over the past few years, short-term rental activity. I think it's just, as it's becoming more popular, we're seeing a few more people do it. And we're not the only community. I think that trend is happening throughout the nation in resort communities.
The world, yeah. Sue, any other observations you have?
Yeah, can I speak?
Sure.
I think the Hari organization, I don't know if I trust a lot of their numbers because anybody can just go on VRBO. You could go home tonight, go on VRBO, and there's a map, and it allows you to zoom in on our little town, exactly the borders of the town, and then a number comes up and dots for each little rental, and it tells you today there's 87. And it's right there. You don't have to do anything else. So I think 87 today. So, and they're all active.
On one listings.
Just on VRBO.
Yeah.
Yeah, you type it in, and you go onto your little map, and so it's not a secret. And I looked up, they don't put listings on that aren't active. They're they're hidden. You can research that. So I don't know about all these fake or hidden ones. I think really, Jeff, the ones that I researched, they're active. You can look and their days are blocked off. So there's 87 on VRBO, which has the most Harbor Springs rentals. And then Airbnb, oddly, doesn't have quite as many. You'd think Airbnb was the bigger one. Another 20 or so, but you have to cross-check those because some are on both. It's very easy to see how many are on. Airbnb is a lot harder. You can't zoom in. Their map is a little trickier. But I mean, I'm confident there's 111.
Okay.
But
That's great.
We work together and somewhere in there, Jeff.
The trouble though is some of those listings, and I've been on there, I could create a listing today for Aldicus Home. And I could list it, I could show that it's able to be booked. Obviously, it's not available because I'm not the owner. Now, not that I think that anybody's purposely doing that. I think that what is something that happens is one person owns the property, uses it as a short-term rental. When they sell the property, they don't take down their listing, and it still shows as an active listing.
There aren't any of those on VRBO for Harbor Springs. There's one that says no longer renting on the very title one. So you can research them. They really are hidden.
All right, well,
How many rentals do you think are going on
111.
that aren't, that we don't know?
Oh,
Case in
I
point, my
don't
sister.
think we don't know about.
Well, okay, this is
I mean, there's
this is
some.
out of the township. My sister knew about a condo at Harbor Cove, and it came with its own personalized stable of renters.
There's a lot in Harbor Cove.
I mean, and so nobody in the township has any idea what's going
But that's
on.
not Harbor Springs.
How many of those do you think happen in Harbor Springs?
This is a really small town.
People just rent their homes. They don't
Some,
tell
but
you,
know
they
what?
don't sign up, they don't list them.
Yeah, but we see neighbors that
We
do
know
that.
neighbors.
Exactly.
We know our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It's not easy to rent your home. I mean, my neighbor is starting to do that. It's really hard to arrange. I mean, people do it, but Airbnb that's revolutionized renting.
Yeah.
Why would you do it yourself? They have a format that you just plug in your info and it's magic. Your money comes in. I mean, you'd be silly to do it yourself. Yes, there's probably a few that want to keep total control.
And renting to friends,
Yes,
and, you know,
relatives, whatever,
they
right.
have a list that they've been doing for quite a long time.
Okay, so what I'm taking away from all this is we could spend a whole lot of time getting right down to the exact number of rentals, but
There's a lot.
what I'm taking away is that it has grown since last year, and that's what some people in the community were concerned about. That's why we proposed a moratorium, which council wasn't ready to act on that. So then the question is, what should we do this
I'm
summer?
sorry, Bill, what was some of the feedback from the council as far as why they didn't want to kind of move forward with that?
A couple of things. Well, Al was there,
Al
but
was there.
it didn't see it as a problem really, and didn't want, and actually 2 members had to recuse themselves.
Okay.
And that left 3, and 2 didn't see it as a top problem.
Got it.
That in the moratorium, they didn't think would be effective.
Yep.
So fair, that's fair.
And they were given faulty data to some degree.
I don't think it was faulty data, Sue. I think it was just.
It was too low. It was too low.
The process is our process here is you can apply on a rolling basis. So we're not getting all our applications for short-term rentals.
I understand.
January.
It's
so
behind, it lags.
It's not.
So I don't think a difference in the number would have changed council's mind on this. But, so now we have a chance to reconsider everything again, all the issues. We had the way we handled this last year is we had a special meeting. We had 100 people here in this room. And there was a subcommittee of the planning commission that put this event together. And it was a lot of work. And, but people, I think, enjoyed talking about it. We learned some stuff we learned some interesting ideas that other communities are doing. And we implemented, I don't know, 5 or 6 different improvements in our process from it. So the question is, should we do something again this year in terms of discussion with the public, and what could it be?
Bill, can I just
Yeah.
interject there? So I think, this is just my opinion, obviously, if you guys want to do something. I think we already established from last year that we wanted to do something. I don't necessarily see the need to have another public input session. I think we just need to tackle the question of, do we want to limit short-term rentals and in which districts and how? I think that was our next task. We already addressed the ordinance with the nuisance issues and all that enforcement issues. So now the next question at hand is, how are we gonna go ahead and limit them, if that's what we want to do, limiting them in certain districts? I think we should just jump in on
get to
it.
the-
We already had, I think we know where the public stands.
All right.
And the public does think we're tackling it. I mean, the folks that I talk to, they're just like, well, you're working on that, right?
I think we should just do it, and whatever the result is, that's up to planning commission, city council, but I think we just need to.
And the bill is still floating around right now.
Yeah, it's probably not gonna go through, probably won't hear about it again until November when it's election time.
Okay.
Or lame duck.
Yeah.
Lame duck.
So I think we just need to act, even if that action ends up being right back where we started and no change, but we need to act.
And
there will be a
opponents have no recourse.
Past practice, because this is the 3rd or 4th time that a bill like this has come forward. Previously, they've been referred to committee where they died. So my guess is if this languishes too long, they'll just modify, create a new bill and resubmit something. This is a potential. I've seen that with a couple of different zoning and assessing things that have come up in the last 5 to 10 years.
And whatever the planning commission decides is gonna go to council, it'll be a public meeting there, and there'll be a public meeting here at planning commission to discuss it. At a public planning commission meeting, there'll be a public meeting at council, and so whoever's for or against, whatever changes we propose or don't propose, it'll all be hashed out in a public meeting anyway, so.
How do people feel about the concept of just getting onto the issue and starting to tackle it?
I think we need to get going on it, because the longer we wait, the more units are gonna be out there. And my understanding is the approach to take is not through a planning commission and zoning ordinances, because that'll grandfather everybody in, that it needs to be done through some sort of housing code, which needs to go through council.
At least it needs to, the appropriate avenue would be a police power ordinance
Yeah.
through council, because it involves licensing.
And we already have it in our city code, so it would just really be it. We have the city code language, and if the planning commission recommends to council no changes to the cap or the number and just keep it as it is, then we don't make a change to the city code. If the planning commission does think we need a cap, or even ban short-term rentals from certain districts, whatever the choice is, then we would just go back to the city code and say, in these districts, this is number, and if we want to change the process at all. But
It's not, excuse me,
No.
Victor, it's not to say that the planning commission can't author the ordinance, but it won't go through the zone code.
Right, understood. So, yeah, Al had called the question of council. He said, I think we ought to forbid short-term rentals in residential districts. Council said, and I offered that, I would bring this to you all and we would talk about how we could give it a bit more focus, thorough analysis, and make a well-reasoned recommendation to council. Are you up for that this summer?
Yes.
All right. Okay, let's plan on doing that then. And we're gonna talk about maybe our schedule for the next 2 or 3 months regarding reviewing the zoning code, which is our purview. We can talk about, where we might fit the short-term rental thing into the next couple of months as well. So let's hold on to that for a minute. And we've finished the master plan. Council approved it, and now it's time to get onto the zoning code. And we were asking if John could give us some recommendations about how to tackle this beast. And what pace we might take and what priorities and that kind of thing. John, do you have any thoughts for us about how to do this?
Yeah, you can do it a couple of ways. Either it can be the planning commission as a whole that goes through each of the articles and does a review, or maybe there's a subcommittee of the planning commission along with obviously Jeff, and if Victor wants to get involved, there may be somebody from council too, and the zoning board of appeals, and they work on it as a team. And then when they get a draft together, they would submit it to the full planning commission for review and discussion. That's one technique. Or if the planning commission wants to do it, then you do it in chunks of articles that make sense. So like the district, the articles that involve the regulatory part of it, like what uses are permitted or special use, that would be like an article that would stand on its own and be reviewed by the planning commission, because that's pretty important. Other articles like the zoning enforcement, the amendment process, those articles can be reviewed, 2 or 3 of them together, because they're kind of all connected. So that's how you can do it. And you can do it over the size of the code that you have. If you want to go through and kind of reorganize it a little bit, you're probably talking a good 9-month process to review the articles, do the revisions, a couple different iterations to flush things out. So it's going to be a commitment from the PC. I would tend to reorganize. At the next meeting, I can give you an idea of maybe how to reorganize the ordinance to make it a little bit more user-friendly. And if you agree to that, then we can start writing the articles based on that new format.
New order.
All
right.
And then plus, I'd like to have at some point a discussion with the planning commission, and maybe you can start thinking about it for the next meeting on what your hot topics are.
Yeah.
I mean, you've worked with the ordinance. Obviously, I'm new to it. You've been working with it for a while, so you may know where some of the deficiencies are or some of the gaps are that you need to fill in. Okay. So then as we're rewriting it, we can use that information to amend the articles appropriately.
Great. So you would offer to put together kind of a roadmap for us about
Yes.
possible new structure, and then what order we would attack the
articles
in.
correct.
How does that sound to everybody?
I like that.
Sounds good. Yeah, we could use some structure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Little organization.
Yeah, a little organization and
Can do.
timeline. That's great. And maybe we could speed things up if maybe Jeff could send out a message to all of us, asking us to submit to him our top zoning code topics, things that have been bugging us or that we see room for improvement, that could save a monthly cycle. Would you guys care to take a look at that? Okay.
At this point in time, we don't have any anything that's been submitted for review for our next meeting.
So we would know
So
by
we're,
today.
yeah, we would know by today. So we're pretty open
Right.
for room at our July meeting, which is on, let's make sure people are gonna be there since we are in July. So July 21. Hopefully nobody has too many summer plans that day, but we can start in on I think 2 topics that we have. We've outlined what our next phase is for review for short-term rentals. We can bring in a map, we can start looking at areas, we can talk about density of short-term rentals and where we want to see density, where we want to see less density or none. And then we can, John mentioned that he could prepare an outline and whatnot. I'll definitely send out a memo to you guys asking for your top priorities for areas of the zoning code that you feel need to be addressed and adjusted.
Along with the short-term rentals, I think if we are going to come to the conclusion that we are going to limit them, or we'll then have to have a process, a fair process for how people can apply. Is it first come, first serve? What is it? So then that's the second step if we do. So there's, I think, 2 aspects to the short-term rental is, are we putting caps in districts, and then what's a fair process? And there's a lot of other communities that have examples.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot, I know Sue, you looked at it, there's a lot of different things going on in different communities, but those are 2 elements we'd have to look at for short-term rentals.
All right, so good. So we got a couple of real meaty topics for next month. And is everybody okay with attending at this point?
I'm actually out of the country in July.
Boot them off the board.
All right, so otherwise it looks like we would have a quorum, we'll miss you. Yeah, but it would be great if you could submit some topics.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, sounds like we have a plan. And is there anything else members would like to bring up? All right, that's a wrap. Meeting's adjourned.